Ladies, gentlemen, and exiles of all ages, Path of Exile 2's early access released yesterday, and aside from a couple hours of server up and down jankiness, it's actually been extremely smooth running since then. A lot of people are of course jumping into the game for the first time, and as you start, even in the first few levels, you will start to come across a number of items called orbs, that are essentially the start of the concept of crafting in the game, which the game doesn't give you like a proper tutorial on really, so much as just giving you the items and trying to let you work it out. So essentially, mostly aimed towards newer players to the series, of course, we're going to go over the basics of crafting in the early game, especially of Path of Exile 2, and some good general practices and tips surrounding it as well. First things first, let's talk about the actual methods of crafting. There are a ton of different parts of crafting that will exist in Path of Exile 2 overall, but the vast majority of these just will not be relevant to you until you reach the actual endgame. A few more of these will of course unlock around the midpoint of the story too, but again today I want to focus around the early game of this, by which I mean Act 1, and pretty much the first half or so of Act 2 as well, in which crafting starts off somewhat simple once you actually start to play with the systems, but it is just absolutely invaluable for player power. One of the best ways to gain power early is by getting some solid items, and the best way to get solid items in Path of Exile 2, especially early game, is to create them yourself, otherwise you're just relying on RNG. That said, to start with this, there are four main items you will want to be thinking about at this stage of the game. These are the orbs of transmutation, the orbs of augmentation, regal orbs, and exalted orbs. Orbs of transmutation are all about creating usable starter magic items. The way that items work in this game is a common item has no modifiers, a magic or blue item has up to 2 modifiers, and a rare or yellow item has 3 to 6 modifiers. The orb of transmutation is used for turning a regular common into a magic item, giving it a random modifier. These you should essentially just be spending as you get them to try and get some starter items to craft onto. They won't be hard to find later on, and turning commons into magics that you can build off has much more potential value to you early, as it can give you some majorly strong starting points to actually go from. I'm not using a shield personally, of course, as I am a monk, but to show you an example here is a common shield. If you use an orb of transmutation on it, now it will become a magic item with 1 modifier, physical thorns in this case. Let's say that you like thorns, you want to incorporate thorns purposefully into your build, and so you want to use this shield and build it up to be even stronger. Then you would next want an orb of augmentation. What these do is add a new modifier to a magic or blue item. If I were to use it on the shield, for example, it would then gain a second modifier, which caps out the potential of a magic rarity item. Like the orbs of transmutation, these are relatively fine to just sort of use if you have anything with the potential value for actually using. If the first modifier is good on an item, use these to see if the second modifier also rolls well on it. If you use this and then you like the second upgrade as well and you want to keep going, let's say both of the stats that rolled are genuinely worth having for you, the next step would be using a regal orb. These are rarer to find than the first 2 crafting orbs for clear reasons, and these specifically upgrade a magic item into a rare item and add a 3rd modifier. So if you take a magic item with 2 modifiers and use one of these, you get a 3rd random modifier, which then also turns the item rare as a result. Then the final sort of step to this early game are the exalted orbs, which are like the upgraded version of the orbs of augmentation. The orb of augmentation is used to add a modifier to a blue item and blue items only. The exalted orbs are used to add a modifier to a rare item, the yellow items. They have the same technical function of just adding 1 modifier, but they are used at a different stage of an item's journey of its crafting, and you can use these until you hit the cap of 6 modifiers for a rare yellow item. Outside of this, there is one other main system that you are likely to encounter early with crafting, which are the scraps. There are a couple of different types of scraps that you can find, but these increase the quality level of items, with different scraps being for different item types. Martial weapons, caster weapons, or armor for these specifically. Quality level essentially increases the main stat of an item, and quality can go up to 20 maximum. For martial weapons, this increases the base physical damage stat, which is obviously quite important for your actual damage output. For armor, it increases any armor, evasion, or energy shield rating innate to that item, which makes it increase your defensive powers too. Items can drop with bonus quality rating randomly, meaning that they can roll with up to 20 quality on drop to begin with, but this is to increase the quality of items that don't, or to increase the quality of ones that do drop with quality but at lower ratings. Basically, this is something that you don't want to all in on unless you are certain it's an item you are going to be using for a fair amount of time. You do not necessarily want to hoard every scrap that you find, but there's no real use getting a level 10 weapon to 20 quality if there's like a high chance of you upgrading it in the next zone over. If, however, let's say you used all of our prior crafting things, our tips that we've talked about here, maybe you turned a common weapon into a magic weapon, and then you turned that into a rare weapon as well, you've got 4 or more modifiers on it, and they're all looking good, it's juiced up, all the stats on it are things you actually want to keep around, that is when you want to consider increasing the quality of that item. These crafting crafting materials aren't too common early game. They will get more common later in the game, so don't feel afraid of using them, but just know that this is the specific type of situation where you actually want to be increasing the quality of items. The one final bit that I want to talk about here with early game crafting related stuff technically isn't crafting, at least not at this stage of the game. Later on you will get items called artificer's orbs. These can add sockets to martial weapons or armor, but for now in the early game you'll be relying on RNG whether or not items will drop with sockets already on them. Items can have up to 2 sockets in them, and in these sockets you can put runes, which you'll find relatively early on as well as random drops. It is really important to note that if you get a weapon that has sockets in it, it increases its value significantly early on, as the base elemental runes give you bonus flat damage on hit. If you find one that matches the element you are focusing on, or one that focuses physical if that's your goal for damage instead, then the damage increase from just having a single rune slotted into your weapon is quite noticeable, especially early game where flat damage is a very big difference compared to later on. Think of it this way, early game you're doing like 5 damage a hit, so if you add an upgrade that makes it give you an extra 12 damage per hit, you're more than doubling your damage. If later game where you're doing like 50 damage per hit, you get plus 12 damage per hit, it's still a good upgrade, but it's not as impactful as it is early game. You want these especially early game. Putting these in your weapons will give you a significant early power boost. That said, once you put a rune into an item, you cannot take it out, so you are committed to where it's placed. Don't go throwing runes around willy-nilly, but again, if you have an item that you plan on using for more than a few levels, and if it has a socket or 2, especially if it's a weapon, I recommend filling these sockets and boosting your power to make the campaign just that little bit more comfortable along the way. Outside of this, most of these crafting materials can also come in small quantities from disenchanting your gear. Generally speaking, for early game, I recommend selling all magic and common items, disenchant rares to get regal shards. The gold that you get early can be used to gamble for better equipment, so that is important to have, and augmentation and transmutation orbs drop frequently enough that you aren't too starved that you need to disenchant your magic items, but once you do have some good basic equipment going, you can start disenchanting even more too to go really hard to invest in on crafting. That said, the other thing to keep in mind here is that you also want to identify items before you sell them if you're going to sell them, especially once you've unlocked the ability to identify things for free with the hooded one whenever you go back to town. This will increase the actual selling price of every item, which is a really helpful thing if you're trying to pile on gold and roll for items. So if you're going to sell stuff, make sure you identify it first. If you have the ability to identify for free, don't go buying scrolls of wisdom to do this, but this is the general idea. That just about does it for now then, everyone, your guide to early game crafting in Path of Exile 2. Hopefully, if you have been finding the campaign to be a little bit of a struggle, this will help you out, and if you've been breezing through it too, hopefully it still helps you out regardless of that. This game is honestly just so much fun, and I just want to make it as approachable as possible and keep people interested in it and keep them from getting confused. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.